You are at Lake Rant, where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by being one of those. This one is for Aiko Carroll, who says, rant about Wind Waker. So I actually have a review of Wind Waker that is one of the earliest videos still listed on my channel. If you want to hear my in-depth thoughts, I would recommend watching that. But I'm a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. It's one of my favorite Zelda games and one of my favorite games of all time. And a huge part of that has to do with the aesthetic. I think the game looks incredible. It's super memorable, inviting, pleasant to be in. It's a world that, could be as big and as open as it is, and you want to adventure through it because it's just so nice to be there. The whole thing looks amazing. It sounds amazing. It's one of the best soundtracks in a game, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of, orchestral folk, essentially. I like, hearing folksy instruments used in game soundtracks. I'm more likely to, return to a soundtrack if it uses those kind of folk elements. So, I love the look. I love the sound of the game. And, of course, the feel. Zelda games, the biggest reason I come to them is for their amazing kinesthetics, the great controls, the great feeling of movement. And while Wind Waker does kind of start the trend of Link controlling a bit like a motorcycle, where you don't have as much direct control over him as you do steer him, sort of, which finally Breath of the Wild has started to go back on to the older style, which I prefer. But I still like the way that it feels in the Wind Waker. I love combat with the sound effects, with the musical stings and the big puffs of smoke. When you kill an enemy, all of it just feels so good. It's a delightful and memorable experience. And I'm not a fan of Twilight Princess or what they did, when they tried to make it more realistic. I don't think that game is nearly as inviting or fun or interesting to play as the Wind Waker. Now, I do have some complaints about the Wind Waker, and I raised a lot of them in that review, namely that while there is a huge world you can explore, it's not that big, ultimately. Like, the game is... First of all, the main campaign is shorter than Ocarina of Time and other Zelda games in terms of dungeon count. There's more, like, in-between dungeon stuff, but a lot of it is just sailing around. Some of the sections aren't that interesting. I definitely prefer the HD version of the game, especially for the Forbidden Fortress level, which sucked in the original. But, it's overall still a very fun game, but even after you do all that exploration, it gets old because so many of the islands are repeats. There are so many of the same few gimmicks reused. So much of the game feels underutilized. There should have been way more bonus content, way bigger bonus areas. Of course, Breath of the Wild delivers kind of on all the promises that were missing from the Wind Waker. While that game doesn't have the sailing mechanic, traversal is still very fun. It's still a huge open world full of mysteries, but that one has way more mysteries. Now, some people would argue that the shrines kind of trivialize, stuff and make it so the result of wherever you go is always the same. But at least you will see more individual, unique things in that game, I think. Neither one is perfect, and I still think I prefer the Wind Waker over Breath of the Wild because of, I think, the characters and story are more memorable. I think the aesthetic is better looking, and it ages beautifully. It will never look shitty. It'll always look great, as long into the future as we go. The character designs are so fucking spectacularly done. Just everything about the game feels and looks great. I just wish it had been on a more powerful console with more time in development. I think Wind Waker, it was, for its time, absolutely incredible and perhaps untoppable as a big open adventure. But, with what we can do now with a game like Breath of the Wild, it makes me wish we could revisit the Wind Waker and do it again, but with the increased scope that is now possible. Though I don't know if sailing around a world will ever be as popular as something like what you can do in Breath of the Wild. Maybe just having multiple continents and the ability to sail between them, and maybe some islands you can go to would be enough sailing for a big open game. But I'd still love to see it tried one more time.